Hello dear friends, I'm busy putting together a few little things for my granddaughter for Easter, and I'd like some things to be meaning for her, and she is only 6 years old, but she just loves flowers. Her middle name is Rose, so I thought I'm going to make her a little tin container that I can put some plants in for her, so that she can just take them home. I think it'll be nice and easy and it's light. So I'm going to go and paint this first with some white PVA paint, and then I'm going to make two little holes at the bottom just using one of those can openers because I felt I'd like to share with you how to do it easily. Alternatively, you could use a nail if you wanted to do that as well. I find when I use nails it's easier to fill the container with sand and then put a piece of cardboard over and then slide that onto the ground so that it's really solid, and then bash into it, because otherwise the container does tend to dent. And then we're going to use a napkin to do a little bit of decoupage on there. So let me go and paint this. Well, I've painted my tin. It's not perfectly painted, but that doesn't matter. And I've made two little holes at the bottom. Yeah, that's just so that if I put a plant in there with my little granddaughter, that it'll have some drainage holes. Being little, there's always a good chance that she's going to change her mind and say, Granny, I don't want to do that. Then I've got some Mod Podge here that I'm going to be using to stick my napkin down with. And then I have this lovely rose napkin. Now, napkins, as most of you will know, have different layers to them, or different pliers. This one is what they called a 2-ply napkin. So I'm just going to separate these 2 pliers because I don't need the bottom layer. If I try and stick this down when it has 2 layers, I'm going to find I get a lot of wrinkles, and I don't want that. And I want to make sure that I am actually able to see my design nicely without looking distorted too much. So one of the reasons why I have painted this tin first is because it was silver, and you will see that the background color is pretty transparent here. So I've wanted to actually cover this in such a way that I would be able to put a very light design on here and have a nice light background. I'm not going to attempt to stick this down as a whole napkin because I want to have a bit more control over where I'm going to be putting my things. So what I'm going to do now is just gently use my 2 fingers, or my 2 thumbs, just to pull apart the napkin around the designs that I have on here already. So I'm going to separate these into individual pictures. And I'm not worrying too much about the background. You'll find when you tear paper you get a really nice sort of soft feathered edge, and that always is a pleasure to work with because it almost looks as though it melts away, rather than a cut edge which tends to have rather a hard line to it. So I'm just going to gently pull the napkin apart, making sure I have individual designs. This will allow me to choose how I place them and what the orientation of the design will be. If you wanted to, you could fussy cut them out, but I would suggest doing that when your napkin is still whole, and then actually deciding which ones you want to use and separating the paper after. For fussy cuts, it's much easier to actually have all 3 pliers together, otherwise it becomes incredibly difficult to cut. So I have a stem coming up here, which would obviously be a flower further on here, but I don't really want that, so I'm going to just bring this and take that off here so that I don't end up with a bit of green in the wrong place. And what's actually happening as I'm using my thumb here is it's just stopping the paper, which is so fragile, from tearing in any which direction. I have a little bit more control over it, so I can take out things I don't want and keep those that I do. And as you can see, it doesn't take very long to do this. So let me just see, I think I want a couple of these buds, and then I'll give them a fairly longish stem, so I'm going to bring right down to the end of this napkin picture and pull it up to the top, because that will give me the choice of whether I want a long one. I don't want a stem coming up from the top of this flower, so I'm going to actually put my thumb there and pull the napkin away there as close as possible, like that. And I've got another little bud here, so I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to tear the napkin along this line, there we go, and loosen that, and then I can add these sprigs in as fillers. So I'll start by layering down some of the bigger images first and then filling in with the smaller ones. So what I ideally should be doing here now is loosening this one here, and again I'm going to lose this green stem. That's just there. Yeah, that's it, just so that I have the picture. Right, so I have a few to go with. What I don't want is to have this red line along the bottom, so I think I'm going to just take this green stem off here like that, and that will make sure that I lose that red line. Now what I would suggest you do is just keep all your bits until you've completed your project, because sometimes you need just a little bit of color for a decoration. Maybe you've actually damaged your napkin and you just need a little bit, and if you've been so efficient and thrown things away as you're working, you're going to find sometimes that you're at a bit of a loss. Pencil crayons also are really useful for touching up things, as they have very subtle colors, but just keep the bits. I just find it's easier to match with something that is original. Right, so I'm losing all these little red lines where I can, just because I don't want these hard edges, and I can tear a little bit closer to the design in some instances as well. Here I'm not going to be able to do too much with that, but what I might do is just lose that one little bit of leaf there, which gives me a slightly more controlled look without it. Maybe bring this in a little bit so it's a bit more natural. And then here I'm going to lose this green stem because I don't really need it, and that will take out quite a lot of this red line like that. And I'll see if I use that before I do anything there. You do want to try and get as much of this tearing done before you start, in case you get sticky. Otherwise you're having to run backwards and forwards to wash your hands. But I have a fairly good idea about what I want to do here. Right, so I think we've more or less got what we need. Make sure that you can see your images separately and that they're easily accessible before you start. I think I quite like that stem here. So let's just get this one out and then we'll start sticking. You'll see that this background color is really light, and although it's not white as the tin is, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to blend together, and you can always stick a bit of this background paper on to your design if you wished, just to fill in a few little gaps or to break up the white. Right, there we go. Right, so I'm all prepared, and I'm going to start firstly by giving you a tip with your brushes. When you're working with napkins, because they're so fragile, go for something like a Taklon brush, which is one of these cheap nylon ones with really fine, soft brittles. They won't tear your napkin as easily. The second thing that you want to do is just to take some water and dip your brush in the water. Now, this is not going to affect your decoupage, but what it does mean is that when the podge gets on here, which is really sticky, it doesn't all settle around the top of this, which is called the ferrule, this metal part, and actually make it really hard to clean out. So I'm going to just wipe my brush dry now. So I've effectively just washed it and dried it. And then I'm going to just take some of my podge. Whoopsie, wasn't expecting that. Oh my word, you can see I haven't used this for a while. Got a nice little ring around the top. Never mind, I'll clean them up just now. So I'm going to put my podge onto my tin. Alright, this way I'm not getting too sticky too quickly. And you'll find also that because your napkins are very thin paper, that your podge will go through. So I've got a fairly even coat. I've made sure that I've got some podge going into those little gaps, and I'm just going to start with some of these bigger images here. I'm now going to dip my brush in my podge, and I'm going to brush over it, and because the podge on the tin has already secured my image down, I'm able to do this without actually having to handle it, and by just brushing left to right with a wet surface so that I don't lift up the image that's already on the tin, I'm able to get this down pretty smoothly. I mean, you might occasionally get the odd wrinkle. Right, when you've smoothed over, Don't be tempted to actually go over and over it too much, because then you're going to end up with problems. Now I'm going to hold this in my hand, and I want to get something that's got a bit of a taller stem here, just to get a bit of height. So I'm going to again put my podge on my tin, making sure that I've got it into the grooves, and if I'm clever and place that there, it will look like a little bud that's coming out. So I'm going to do that. I'm brushing it north to south just to get it secured, and then I'm going over that with the podge that's already on my brush. I know in some parts of the world you call it Mod Podge, that's fine. We all know what it is. Right, so the next one, I'm going to again put Mod Podge or podge onto the tin, and I'm going almost for the opposite side here, and I'm going to put another big image. And I can see one on my table here that already has a straight edge at the bottom, which will be perfect to line up against the base of the tin. So I'm going to pick that one up as soon as I've smoothed this all over. There we go. Now let's grab this, see, and I think I'll put that right here. You want this to go right to the base of your tin, so it doesn't look as though it's fallen off something, and then just smooth the surface down. Make sure you always do have a bit of Mod Podge on your brush, otherwise you are likely to find that your brush gets sticky and it will tear your napkin. Right, so this is going on really nicely and smoothly. I'm not working on the underneath side of the tin, bearing in mind that if I put a plant in here with my little granddaughter, that there's a good chance of water leaking out, so we don't want that to be something that's going to damage the design. Right, I'm now looking for another taller image. I think I'm going to put this one here. I'm making sure that the stem comes as close to the base as possible, just so that it looks, and if your paper overlaps a piece that's underneath, that's also okay. So you can see here there was a little bit of an overlap. The soft bristle allows me to just push into these little ridges of the tin, and I'm able to then flatten all the little pieces down. So just using this as a means to turn. Let's see if I can add in something. I've got a bit of a gap here, so possibly let's just see. I'll put some podge on here. If I put a bit of this coming from this direction, I don't like that. Maybe another bigger rose, perhaps. Right, let's put this one down. They don't have to be exactly the same on either side. And you can do this with anything. This is a wonderful thing to be able to make for a fundraiser, because your tins are basically just going to be upcycled from things that you've used in your home, and you will be able to make them into planters. You could make them into pencil tins. You could you could just store all sorts of things. I saw somebody once that took 6 tins and stuck them together on a piece of wood, 3 on either side, and made a handle, and that was lovely as a cutlery caddy. So what I've done here was that I had that as a separate image. I followed that line with another stem, and I've extended that so that it looks as though it's a little bit more, and then there's a little bit of a space here. I might just do something similar on this side. So we're filling this up pretty quickly. Now once you have stuck your designs down, you're going to want to leave these to dry completely, and then I would strongly suggest that you put a coat of deco varnish on there, whichever one you might have, or if you don't have that, just a spray varnish would do, just so that you're able to wipe these down more readily and you're able to keep it nice and clean, especially if it's going to be a planter, because you'll obviously be working with soil and that. So I'm pretty happy with this design. Let me just try and see if I want to add anything more in. What I would suggest that you do is just wait and see how you feel about it once it's dried. If you find that white areas like that are bothering you, then all you need to do is just simply tear off some of this napkin like this, which has the background color. Oopsie, that wasn't a good tear at all. Let's do another one here. Just going to get this line off. And you can always use these as just pieces for breaking up a large white area. Where was that? Here. So I could here just stick a little bit of this on the surface, and you will immediately see that it just breaks up the white a bit. So I think I'll possibly do a little bit of that. I'm just going to let it dry, have a good look at it, and I'll give it a coat of varnish, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. My pot is drying. I thought I'd just show you what I'm going to do with the remaining pieces of napkin that I have. I have a book here that I use quite a lot for my junk journals, and I've just torn out a couple of pages, and all I'm going to do is just to simply take all these leftover little bits and pieces of napkin and stick them randomly on here, never knowing when I might actually need them. But rather than have a drawer full of little bits and pieces that will be all over the place, I tend to have a little blitz every now and again of sticking all these pieces of napkin down, and then if I wanted to make a tag, or I wanted to make some kind of embellishment for my junk journal, I would have some things at the ready. This is quite a large image, so I'm just going to split this one in two, just simply because I know that my journal pages would not be quite as big as that, but I will use that pretty whole. So I'm going to just stick quite a bit of podge on here, making sure that I go to the edge, but if I've missed a spot, then it will go through the napkin as well. And make sure you always have a wet brush when you're working with Mod Podge, so that your napkin doesn't tear. And then I'm going to take this just to the corner and lay it down, whoopsie, lay it down there, and then brush from the middle outwards. That way you can be sure that you are not going to snag things too easily. Quite often if you're trying to brush from the edges, you tend to roll the edge up and it makes a mess. That looks gorgeous. I'm really happy with this one. It's come out beautifully. I definitely will use that. Just use your wet brush to smooth these edges down. There we go. And what else have I got lying around? I think I'll have another page. I've got another big image here, so I'll do one of these. Don't be heart sore about these books. I mean, quite often, especially if a book has been read several times over, they're not worth a lot, and they'll probably, because people don't read as much, as end up in the junk shop or perhaps even a rubbish pile. So if you're creating something new about it, then it's not a bad idea to actually use one of these book pages. I'm just going to tear off a bit of this that doesn't have an image on, whoopsie, and a bit of the picture. I'll see if I can mend that. Otherwise, no, let's just tear it off. It's going to be too tricky to mend. Right, there we go. So let's just stick that down. It doesn't matter whether it's the right way up or the right way down. Not serious at all. And if you do get a wrinkle, so be it. The chances are this will get cut up in any case. There we go. And I just have one more piece here that's quite big and quite nice. Maybe I'll stick it this way around. You still see what I'm doing. Sorry, but I think we probably all do this tendency to pull things towards me, and then I don't realize I'm out of frame. It's quite funny when you're working with a camera, because your space is quite limited, as opposed to working just on your own, you know, for your own fun. So your space is quite tight, and then you've got to remember that your camera doesn't have such a wide area that it can film in, so you've got to keep within that as well. So just being mindful of that. Right, so there you go. So apart from just having my nice little tin, I'm using up these scraps. They won't be lying around. They're not heading for the bin. I will be able to use those at a later stage in a future project. So let me get my tin to dry, and then I will show you what it looks like. There we are. It's all dry now, and I'm very pleased with how that's turned out. I think that I've got a nice sort of spread of coverage and things. I've got my two little holes for drainage if I want to use it as that. I did do one previously where I just glued down a piece of lace, and I did glue it down fairly securely so it couldn't lift, because I didn't want it to get dirtied. And this one, I just put all my little cutting tools in. So it could be a planter, or it could be a pencil storage of some sort. And out of half a napkin, I've got my tin covered, and I've got these pages for using in my journals. So very happy with all of that I've done today. A nice, simple, easy idea, especially if you need to do things for kids, for gifts, or for a fundraiser. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And thank you for watching. Bye for now.